everybody, welcome. My name is Doug Stanton. I'm one of the co-founders of the National Writer Series, and I want to welcome you tonight to our first event of the Winter-Spring 2022 season. It's great to be back, and thank you. We're here tonight with the generosity, or because of the generosity of so many, including your own. I want to list a few other folks who've made tonight possible. Our sustaining sponsor is Cordia. Thank you, Cordia, for being in our community, providing a lifestyle for so many. Our winter-spring season sponsor is Golden Fowler's Home Furnishings, a mainstay in Traverse City. Thank you, Goldens, for being there with us for the entire season. We really appreciate it. Our event sponsor for tonight is the Traverse City Track Club. We'll hear a lot more about them in just a little bit when we get to the main event. Our supporting sponsor is McCall, Image 360, Morsels, and the Cherry Capital Airport. Thank you all. Our arch benefactor sponsor is Northwestern Michigan Arts and Culture Network. Thank you. And our major media sponsor is Traverse City's own daily newspaper, the Traverse City Record Eagle. Thank you, Record Eagle. We're lucky to have you. And we're also lucky to have other amazing media in our community who are supporting media sponsors, and they are Interlochen Public Radio, thank you, Midwest Broadcasting, the Northern Express, and Traverse Area Community Media. Thanks much for the service that you give us all. Our supporting partners throughout the years are Horizon Books, Northwestern Michigan College, and the Traverse Area District Library. Fabulous places all, thank you. And our grantors for our events are the National Endowments for the Arts, the Michigan Council for the Arts and Cultural Affairs, and Michigan Humanities. Thank you for letting tonight happen. Now, I want to introduce to you Christy Bacon, who is probably not a stranger to many of you. She is our interim executive director of the National Writer Series, and she's also the business manager and creative partner of John U. Bacon. Her husband, John's a New York Times bestselling author, and he's a familiar face to many of us on the National Writer Series stage. And we want to welcome Christy tonight as our interim executive director. She comes to us after 10 years in Chicago, where she earned her master's degree in public service from DePaul University, and then she worked extensively in nonprofit management. She moved back to her hometown of Ann Arbor in 2014, and she and John and Teddy, their 6-year-old son, who loves history and hockey, live there today. But all three of them consider Traverse City their home away from home, where that family has many dear, dear friends. So thank you, Christy, for being here. Now please give a warm NWS welcome to Christy Bacon.
Hello and welcome. Thank you, Doug, for that wonderful introduction. As Doug mentioned, my family really does think of this area as our home away from home. We are here all the time visiting friends and enjoying our little place on Torch Lake. My husband and I both have deep connections to this area going back generations. That is why it is such an honor to serve as interim executive director for the National Writers Series. It's an organization we've got to know and love so very well. So once again, my name is Christy Bacon, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our first event of 2022. For many of us, a new year brings resolutions to become more active and to finally get fit. That is why Dr. Daniel Lieberman is the perfect guest for us tonight. Dan, as he prefers to be called, is a best-selling author and the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. In his most recent book, Exercised, Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding, Dan tells us the story of how us humans never evolved to exercise. His engaging stories and explanations will revolutionize the way you think about exercising. Drawing on insights from evolutionary biology and anthropology, Dan busts many of the myths we've built up around exercise and ultimately shows us how we can make exercise a more enjoyable and a regular part of our lives. The National Writer Series is excited to partner with the Traverse City Track Club to bring us the perfect book to help us all keep our New Year's resolution fitness goals. Our guest host tonight is Lisa Taylor, the executive director of the Traverse City Track Club, one of the nation's oldest and largest community-based running clubs. Lisa is also an award-winning youth running coach and an enthusiastic participant in competitive and recreational running events since 1975. We hope you enjoy tonight's conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a great evening of motivating, inspirational messages. We are so happy on behalf of the Traverse City Track Club to welcome Dan to tell us more about being encouraged, inspired, and motivated to maybe simplify exercise in our life and maybe change our life for some. So Dan, welcome. I love the introduction that you are you have a head to toe interest in the human body and its changes through time. Welcome, and we're so happy to have you, and we look forward to sharing at least a little bit of your inspiring message.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but it's amazing that we can do this virtually. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So my first question, I think it will probably inspire you to go off into different tangents. My first question is, of all the research you have done, what finding would blow people's minds away the most about the human body?
Oh, gosh. I don't know what would blow people's minds. Here's a fun one, that when you run, your head bobbles, right? You know, your head wants to pitch forward, and your arm actually acts as a passive counterbalance to prevent your head from pitching forward. So when your head falls forward, your arm also accelerates downward, and there's a little muscle that turns on that you don't even know it's happening. And your arm weighs the same as your head, and and the force of your head pitching forward is countered by the force of your arm going down, and keeps your head from jiggling too much. And it's just one of many examples of the astonishing adaptations that we have as human beings to be physically active. It's a pretty cool one.
All right. So you're an author, you're a researcher, you're a Harvard professor. Here's a really important question to me and to other people who would be inspired to perhaps pursue research or education. What are your early memories that may explain why you chose to study, research, and teach about the human body?
That's an interesting question. So I was interested in medicine when I was growing up. My grandfather was a physician. He was a pediatrician in Brooklyn, and he was sort of my hero. And I was sort of always interested in medicine, and I think that's how I got interested in bodies. But I was also interested in evolution because of, my father was interested in evolution and things like that. We used to travel a lot as a kid. And but really, it was when I was a first-year student in college. I was sure I was going to be a geology major, but I ended up taking a seminar in human evolution with a very inspiring, wonderful professor named David Pilbeam, and we ended up doing research together and ended up publishing a paper my freshman year, which is really fun. And I just fell in love with the theory and power of the theory of evolution, and what an elegant and beautiful way it was of thinking about the natural world. And one thing led to another, and then I started getting interested in archaeology, and started doing some field work. And before I knew it, I kind of forgot about medical school and found myself in a PhD program. But I never really planned it. It just kind of happened. One thing led to another, and I just followed what I was really interested in. And initially, I was really excited by fossils. I was just absorbed and excited by fossils. But fossils are just rocks. And I slowly, as my career went on, I got more interested in the creatures that lived before they became fossils, and how they lived and how they behaved, and that led to And that led to my focus really on physical activity and the evolution of the human body.
So, your book has been described as something so that everyone can read it. This is really complicated information. You've managed to really put it into terms that I think people can understand. And again, I'll repeat that one of our interests in presenting this book is I think it will really inspire people who maybe have felt they could never do it. Maybe they couldn't even get started. How would you describe how you went through the process of writing this book so that everyone could benefit from it, even if they're not PhDs in anthropology or human biology?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I entitled the book Exercised because I really do believe that a lot of people are exercised, literally exercised about exercise. They're confused and they're anxious and they don't understand and they feel bullied and they feel shamed. And so as I was thinking about, because then I studied the evolution of human physical activity. As I was thinking about it, I was trying to think, how can I help all those people I talk to on a regular basis, my students, my colleagues, and how can we think differently about exercise? Because I get the sense that we have a very we've medicalized and commercialized exercise, but it really doesn't work for everyone. And I tell the story in the book, and it's a true story. But when I was just finishing up my previous book, The Story of the Human Body, I was doing fieldwork in a very remote area of northern Mexico and with some Native American runners. And I was being a good scientist. I was being a good anthropologist. I had my questionnaires and whatever. And I had a translator because I don't speak the Native American language that these folks speak. And I was asking people about their running, and I was failing. Every time I asked anybody about how they trained, nobody could really answer the question. And finally, this guy, was asking, was asking how he trained, because he runs these long distance races. And the translator was trying to explain, and I could sort of figure out what she was saying. She said, this gringo, this guy here, he runs, every day, 5 to 10 miles, to prepare for races. And he looked at me and he said in Spanish, so I could understand him. He said, why would anybody run if they didn't have to? And it was like one of those moments where, and we all laughed. And I remember started thinking, he's right. What I do is kind of really weird. And it was one of those sort of little aha moments that I really thought, that's my next book. I want to write a book about how, we shame and blame people for not exercising, but actually until recently, nobody ever exercised. It's a very modern behavior. It's like reading, right? Nobody read until a few thousand years ago, and until like 100 or so years ago, almost very few people on the planet read. There's nothing wrong with reading. There's nothing wrong with exercising, but these are very modern behaviors, and we have to overcome deep and profound instincts to do that. So I was thinking about how can we help people to understand better physical activity and exercise in a kind of compassionate way, without making them feel bad about being sort of normal. And so that was really the inspiration for the book. And so that's how I started crafting it and thinking about it and slowly writing it.
So you mentioned the idea of shaming, and then if you consider somebody who has maybe never really been successful with exercise, how I could read this when I read the book, how can you summarize the most encouraging message about becoming more physically active to maybe the more typical person in the world?
Well, I think, I think if you don't mind, let's go do a definition or two, right? So physical activity is just moving your body. If you go putter around the house and sweep the floors or take the trash out or walk to the grocery store around the corner or whatever, that's physical activity. But exercise is sort of discretionary, voluntary physical activity undertaken for the sake of health and fitness. And And really, until recently, nobody exercised. People were physically active because they had to be, because that was how you got dinner, right? If you were a hunter-gatherer, every day you have to go out and hunt and gather to get food. If you were a subsistence farmer, every day you had to go out and reap and hoe and sow and thresh and do all the things that are necessary to be a farmer, before the invention of tractors and machinery. And it's only in the last generation or two in places like the United States where we now have machines that do all our labor for us, and we've had to invent this really weird thing called exercise. And but in previous times when people were very physically active and also struggling to get enough energy, because energy used to be limited. Today we can go to the local supermarket and get as many calories as we want. In fact, we pay extra money for foods that have fewer calories, right? It's kind of weird, right? So today we have so much energy available to us. We don't really think about it as being a limited resource, but in the past, energy was limited. And so why would you spend extra energy doing needless physical activity that would take energy away from the things that you really need the energy for, like maintaining your body and reproducing and whatever? And so it's an instinct. It's a basic fundamental instinct to avoid physical activity unless it's either necessary or rewarding. So people were physically active, but they had to be when it was necessary, in order to get dinner or avoid being somebody else's dinner. And they were also physically active when it was fun, like when they would dance for or play. Those are all important reasons to exercise. But like, going to a gym and lifting weights whose sole purpose was to be lifted, you actually spend money on those sorts of things, or running on a treadmill, a machine that makes you work really hard to get nowhere at all. Those are very modern things. And so if you have an instinct to avoid them, there's nothing wrong with you. You're actually normal, right? And so that doesn't mean it's not healthy to exercise. It is. But we need to help people not feel bad about their instincts, and instead help people overcome them in this modern world in which we now have to do something really strange, which is like get on a treadmill or go to a gym or do something lovely like join the Travers track club or whatever. But let's be honest, it's kind of weird to do this.
So in relation to that, talk a little bit about what you observed from looking at different cultures and their exercise habits. And you mentioned, voluntary exercise, which is what we do now. We kind of add it into our day. How do we find time to fit this all in? Your research really looked at the normal activities of some of the cultures that are on the opposite spectrum of us, the third world cultures. Talk a little bit about what you observed people doing as activities of daily living and what we can learn from that.
Sure. So for my research, I do a lot of work in Africa. I've been working in Kenya for, almost 30 years now. And I've also been doing work in places like Mexico, and I've done field work all over the world. I've worked, I visited hunter-gatherers in Tanzania and places like that. So I've spent time with Inuit hunters in Greenland. And in all of these cultures, people who don't have cars and shopping carts and supermarkets and whatever, they work pretty hard, but they don't work crazy hard, right? So the average hunter-gatherer, for example, we have this idea you kind of get from what I call the myth of the athletic savage, this idea that, our ancestors were these incredible superhuman, super athletes, people who are always working and they never sat ever. And, turns out that, hunter-gatherers, they work reasonably hard. So typical hunter-gatherer will do about 2.25 hours a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So moderate physical activity is like a brisk walk. So just 2.25 hours. So that's not crazy. It's not like a Tour de France athlete, right? And then for the rest of the day, guess what they do? They sit, just like you and me. Average hunter-gatherer sits about 9 to 10 hours a day, which is not that much different from Americans. So when we tell people, by the way, that sitting is the new smoking, we're kind of not being very truthful, actually. Now, when they sit a little bit differently, and they're more active, and they get up more often, et cetera, but they don't sit in chairs with backs and things like that. But people are physically active, but not crazy physically active. But if you look today at Americans, the average American is maybe doing 20 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So, 6 times to 10 times less than your average hunter-gatherer. And that really declines, by the way, with age. So we evolved to be active, but folks who in these cultures are, they're walking a lot, they're carrying a lot, they're digging, sometimes they're running, they're doing all kinds of basic activities, but they're also kind of hanging around and doing small chores and taking care of kids and cooking and doing the same sorts of things that you and I do, except without, maybe Cuisinarts or something like that. But that's just kind of normal life. And so, it's not an intense amount of physical activity, it's just moderate physical activity. But there are no weekends, there's no bank holidays, there's no retirement. People do this every day in, day out, their whole lives. And importantly, they do it as they age. And so people continue to be active as their grandparents.
And without even thinking about it, this is of huge benefit to their health.
Right. Because physical activity, we all know, you don't need me or you or anybody else to tell us that exercise is healthy. We all know that, right? That's not a mystery. The reason is that, but we often talk about exercise as medicine, but really it's our bodies evolved to be physically active. And when that physical activity has all kinds of benefits, it turns on all kinds of repair and maintenance mechanisms that keep us healthy. It allocates energy, so it prevents us from gaining too much weight. It prevents our hormone levels from getting too high. But the thing is that we never evolved not to be regularly physically active. And so we call that a mismatch. So when our environment, our world, we're not really all that adapted for it, right? So it's really the absence of physical activity that makes us more vulnerable to disease. Of course, so you can live to be a long life without exercising. You just increase your chances of getting a wide range of diseases. And of course, today with medicine, we can kind of keep people going, and we can you can do okay, but for the most part, you do much better if you are regularly physically active. And the key thing is you don't need a lot; just a little bit has enormous benefits.
So you're a scientist first, but also a great writer. You have written 3 books. You should talk about the titles of all of your books. And then related to that, did you wrestle at all with how to title the book? And, tell us about that process of what was your goal in writing the book for the general population of people who are not scientists, the layman, and how did your title come into play, and are you happy with the outcome?
Gosh, well, yeah. So there's a few questions there. I'll combine together. So yes, this is my 3rd book. The first book was called The Evolution of the Human Head, which is a bit more of a serious book. And then I wrote The Story of the Human Body, which did very well. And I really loved writing that. And I partly wrote that as a reaction to the first book because I wanted to write a book about how and why our evolutionary history is relevant to understanding health and disease. And that book is about mismatched diseases. And I really enjoyed writing it. And then it was sort of when I was finishing that book that I thought about writing about physical activity, because that's really my focus. And actually, it took me a long time to come up with a title. My editor, I have a wonderful editor at Random House, Penguin Random House, Errol McDonald, who's a very legendary editor. And oh my gosh, we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about the title. But it's fun, it was just like one night, it just kind of came to me. And it was partly because of that wonderful book, Educated. And I suddenly thought educated, exercise. And in the book, I make fun of the term exercise, right? And I call people who nag and brag about exercise, I call them exorcists. And I suddenly realized that exercise was the perfect title because it's kind of a triple pun, right? It tells you the book's about exercise, but it also it's really the main theme of the book, which is that people today are exercised about exercise. And also I like the kind of slight allusion to being sort of exorcism, sort of getting rid of demons and things like that. So once we hit that was, it was clear sailing at that point. But when you ask about writing for the general public, I one of the things I love about being a professor is I love teaching, and my students are, most of them aren't going to become professors. Most of them are going to become, who knows what they're going to become. They're going to become lawyers and doctors and business people and who knows what. And I find that teaching is just a wonderful way to think about and to explore and how what I do is sort of relevant to not just academics like me, but to the general public. So in a way, when I was writing the book, I was really thinking about my students because they're smart, they're educated, but very few of them are planning to go become PhDs and professors. Most of them are going to go out into the world and do all kinds of things. And I was thinking about them and how I would write for them.
Ah, that's great. Yeah, I was going to ask you who's your star pupil, but that would not be fair. Um, so I'm going to turn it over to one of our great community runners, Mike Tyberg, to ask you some more questions. But the last question I think I have before we move on is, before COVID, we mostly heard of the word pandemic in relation to obesity and chronic disease. Please share your thoughts on this now, now that more of us understand what the word pandemic means.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, a pandemic originally meant a contagious disease that travels around the world. And for the last 100 years, we really haven't had any major pandemics. There've been a few, but nothing like what we're experiencing now. And so the word pandemic kind of took on, it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was hijacked, but it was used by people in medical science to think about what's really been the major increased cause of mortality and morbidity, illness around the world today, which are mostly diseases related to obesity and physical inactivity. So heart disease and cancer. Cancer and heart disease kill 2 out of 3 Americans, right? And until recently, heart disease was extremely rare and cancer was much, much less common. And other diseases like type 2 diabetes and osteoarthritis and osteoporosis and the list, Alzheimer's, all these diseases are much, much more common. And so it's reasonable to call these pandemics because they're spreading around the world. They're not spreading through contagion, but they're spreading because of changes in our lifestyle. But the good news about so that's bad, right? I mean, these are terrible diseases, and we need to find ways to help people who have those diseases. That's the bad news. But the good news is that they're preventable. They're very preventable, and they're preventable. But they're preventable in ways that are challenging because they require changes in diet, and they changes in lifestyle, changes in our environment, and that's why we as a community, we as a country, we as a population, we as a society need to think differently about them so we can help each other avoid these diseases, because nobody wants to get sick from heart disease or cancer or diabetes. And we and I think and we can do more to help people without making them feel bad or shaming them and blaming them, but in a kind of compassionate way, help them live healthier lives. And really, that's my goal. And I think that the lenses of anthropology and evolution can really help us because we've medicalized and we've commodified so much about healthcare. But healthcare doesn't actually account for that much health. So if you actually look at the causes of ill health in the United States and what contributes to people's health, healthcare actually explains only about 10% of the variance. It's really most of the diseases that people get are explained by their social context. It's it's really the social context that people live in, their environment, the foods, the stress that they experience that leads to ill health. And while that's kind of terrifying, it also means that we can do something about it.
Well, Mike will have a lot more questions, but my final questions before I introduce Mike would be, what are your personal exercise habits? How can we learn from that? Because I think you should share your age and, just maybe some of the challenges that you're facing at your age and what you expect to see going forward and what are your goals.
So I love to run, but I was never a great athlete. In school, I was that it's a cliche, but like a lot of cliches, it's kind of true. I was picked last for a lot of teams, and I was kind of a nerd, and but my parents were very physically active. My mother actually started. I described this in the book. My mother started running when I was very young, as part of the women's movement to liberate a gym, and she was one of the first sort of runners in the runners movement. And I kind of just picked that up from my parents, and my parents like to hike, and so I've always liked to do that. And but I was never really very good. And it wasn't really until I started studying the evolution of running that I started getting sort of more serious about my running. I was just sort of a jogger. And I actually ran my first marathon in my 40s, partly because I was invited to after having written I wrote this paper called Born to Run about the evolution of running. And I started getting invited to various marathon conferences. And I thought, well, I should try one of these. And I kind of got hooked. And it took me a long time, but I finally scrabbled my way up to being able to qualify for Boston through a lot of work. And now I've run, I've run 25 marathons now, and training for my 12th Boston in a row. But I struggle to, I struggle. I'm barely able to qualify, and not always. And I struggle to run, but I run a fair amount, and I also try to do weight training a few times a week. I found Peloton really helpful, actually, the Peloton app.
Okay.
But I'm not. Nobody would ever say I'm a great athlete. I just struggle like everybody else. But it's been a really wonderful part of my life, and I'm very grateful for it.
So on a day when it might be hard to fit things in, you might spend 30 minutes to an hour to take care of your body and your mind. And
Well, that's one of the things is that if you become somebody who writes and does research about physical activity, you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is, right? So I'll give you an example. In my building, right, where I teach in some place called the Peabody Museum at Harvard, which is a beautiful old Victorian building, and my office and lab is on the 5th floor, and it's really big flights of stairs. And every day when I walk into the building, I would like to take the elevator every day. There's no question about it. There's a little voice in my head that says, take the elevator. But if anybody sees me on the elevator, I'll be called a hypocrite, right? So I have no choice. I have to take the stairs. And I think that, that kind of, in a strange way, being, part of the sort of exercise world and writing about it and, teaching about it has, I now have kind of a bit of a responsibility to kind of do it. And that actually helps motivate me.
yeah,
It's strange, but it's true.
well, thank you for all those great comments for me. I'm going to turn things over to Mike. Mike is a longtime runner in our community, and I know that he has really valued his involvement with exercise in his lifestyle. And he is also a doctor of pharmacology. And so I knew he would love talking to you about your book. And so I am just going to turn it over to Mike Tyberg and see where things go.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that introduction. And thank you, Dan, for allowing me to be asking you a few questions like that. So initially, I think from the last couple of minutes, I think we're almost twins, because I was considered a nerd pretty much. I was probably picked last more often than you, probably in school too. And running was one of those things that I just got into actually after college. And, a little bit post my first child, and kind of went from there. But yeah, so running is part of what I do now. Semi-retired, and it really helps with the stress component too now. So with everything going on, so I got a few minutes here, so I'm going to be able to ask you a couple of questions. And I think the first one I want to ask, I really liked some of the questions or the chapters that you had, breaking things down like sleep and things like that. And the first question I had is about sleep itself. I think we're all been taught and told about, 7 to 8 hours or 9 hours of sleep a night is optimal, in which you explained a lot in the book, the importance of it, but also it's probably not as many hours as we think like that. What about like the postprandial sleep or napping that many cultures kind of go along with like that? Any value in that at all?
Gosh, well, I think we've kind of, just like we've medicalized exercise, we sort of medicalized sleep, and we kind of, we've created all these myths about it, right? And I think the more I study sleep, and the more I, just like my own observations of, just traveling into different cultures, is that you name it, people do it, right? In some cultures, people nap, but in many cultures they don't. Like the hunter-gatherers, or the subsistence farmers that I know in Africa, I haven't seen anybody ever nap, but they don't nap very often, at least. But so, and furthermore, studies have shown that if you actually put monitors on people in these societies, and just go away and come back a few months later, places where there's no electricity, there's no cell phones, there's no TV, there's no electric lights, there's nothing that that supposedly keeps us awake at night. They only sleep about 6 to 7 hours a night. So we've got this, we've kind of mythologized sleep, just as we've mythologized exercise. And I think it helps to understand there's just a lot of variation, and just as we evolved to be physically active, we also evolved to be physically inactive, and it's important to understand that. So yeah, I mean, if you like to nap, that's fine. If you don't like to nap, that's fine. I think most people, but I think the thing is that what we do is, by being very medicalizing and prescribing and selling sleep, like a lot of other things, we make people kind of stressed about it. And stress is the major enemy of sleep, right? If you get nervous about sleep or stressed about something, guess what happens? Your cortisol levels go up. Cortisol is an arousal hormone. It's your fight and flight hormone. And guess what? It prevents you from sleeping. So making people stressed about sleep, in a way, kind of is the worst thing we could possibly do to help people sleep. And again, just as I entitled the book "Exercised," to say we're exercised about exercise, we're also kind of exercised about sleep, about sitting, about all kinds of other aspects of our behavior.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned in the book the importance of at least what you do is running with some colleagues, or Aaron Bagish being one of them like that. And socialization, I've read recently the importance of socialization with exercise itself. Could you kind of elaborate on that and the importance of that?
Sure. Thank you, because that's an important topic, because really, remember what I said earlier, which is that we evolved to be physically active for two reasons, and two reasons only, right? One, when it was necessary, and the other, when it was rewarding, right? And today it's not necessary anymore. Nobody needs to do it, right? So how are we gonna help each other be physically active? Well, by making it rewarding. And what's the best way of making it rewarding? By making it social. I mean, just think about the Traverse, City Track Club, right? You go out and you have friends, you meet each other, you have great conversations while you're running, you help each other along, but the same is true of a soccer team, or a football team, or a walking group, or dancing, right? Dancing is this physical activity with somebody else, right? And or several other people. So in general, things that are social tend to be rewarding and social and fun. And I think the more that we can make physical activity, especially for people who are averse to it or struggling to do it, by making it social, it's so much more rewarding. And it also, you get feedback, and also you can also make it necessary. So Aaron Bagish, who's an exercise cardiologist at Harvard Medical School and just lives a few blocks from me, and he's a good colleague of mine, and we've published a bunch of papers together, and he's also an expert runner, but we often text each other, the night before, and agree to meet at 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning or whatever. And it always seems like a good idea, on Tuesday night, to meet Wednesday morning at 6:30. But Wednesday morning at 6:30, I never want to meet him, right? I'd rather stay in bed, right? But he's going to be waiting for me on the corner, or he thinks I'm going to be waiting for him in the corner. So we've kind of made it necessary for each other in a social way, just like if you agree to meet friends for a run, or meet friends for a game of soccer or something like that. And but then we keep each other going and have a nice conversation, and I never finish one of those runs regretting having done it, even though I'm usually a little grumpy when I arrive, right? So, that's, I think, a perfect example of how making physical activity more social can make it more rewarding and more fun. And I think it's something that more of us should do.
I agree. Yeah. So you've been, a researcher for, as you stated, for over 30 years, going to Kenya like that, and visited, many different cultures around the world. Would you say, of all those that you've gone to, your favorite population or culture that you've gone to of those? And of that, when do you stop saying, okay, we're not affecting the population itself? As so many different studies going on in that culture?
Well, I mean, I don't have a favorite culture. I mean, there's just no way to say that. I mean, I love the diversity of human cultures. I love traveling, and I've really learned a lot from my travels. The place that I've gotten to know the best, because we've been working there now, we've now been working in a particular rural community in Kenya now for over 13 years, and I've really come to love the area. And have such a deep appreciation for the people we've worked with, because these are subsistence farmers who work out in a very remote rural area. There's no roads, there's no electricity, there's no running water. Very few people have shoes and whatever, and they work so hard, and they're trying so hard to do the best they can and to get educations for their children. And I've learned a lot from living and working with these communities, and just getting to know people over the years, and we've become friends. And I think that so many of us think that the world around us is normal, right? We think it's normal to get up and like, just think about, like, when you brush your teeth in the morning, you go to the bathroom, you turn a tap, and out comes water, right? You think it's completely normal, but until recently, nobody had plumbing, right? Even if you lived in a major city like London or wherever, you still had to go to a pump and pump the water and bring it to your house. There's so many, just turn on a switch and light turns on, and we have heat. And I think I've learned a lot from living in places where life is like it used to be, and learning how people adapt and struggle. It makes me appreciate all the my life, but it also makes me appreciate their life too. And so I know that's a very kind of roundabout answer, because there's no simple answer to your question, but I've enjoyed all the various places I've worked, and just had amazing experiences and met wonderful folks.
So one last question I have is, chapter 13, I think you actually indicated the exercise and disease states that are going on, and how exercise has really improved many of the disease states that we have, like that too. When is it not appropriate to really put yourself out there in a lot of exercise, or infectious processes going on, or things like that? So what's your feeling on that?
So there's a bit of a debate still going on about this. So it's called the open window hypothesis. So for the most part, exercise is good for you, right? So what we know, and maybe I can show a quick slide, if that's all right. But we know that, actually, do you mind if I do that? I'm going to quickly share my screen to show, because this is actually kind of important. Let me just get here to, whoops. Yeah. So this is data from a huge sample. Whoa. There we go. This is data from a huge sample of individuals from around United States and Europe, over 660,000 individuals. And on these bars here are the percentage of people who engage in different amounts of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. This is sort of minutes per week. And then the solid bar at the top is the relative risk of all-cause mortality. Whoa, what's going on here? Of what people die from. And you can see that if you just exercise, an hour a week, right, you have a 20% reduction in your all-cause mortality. If you exercise 150 minutes a week, you have about a 30% reduction. And eventually you get down to about a 40% reduction, and it levels off. And then if you can see here, there's a slight rise when you get to ridiculous amounts of extreme activity. This is actually not a significant level, by the way, because there are so few people out here. You can see the numbers here are very small, but this is actually not statistically significant. So what that means is that a little bit of exercise, even a little bit, if you're not active, even just like 10 minutes a day, can have a substantial effect just on mortality. And this is not even morbidity, not illness, just mortality. More is beneficial, and eventually the benefits level off. Whether or not you can exercise too much is extremely controversial, and there's actually not a lot of evidence for that. But the one area where people worry about too much exercise is for infectious disease. So the idea is that if you like run a marathon, you're more likely to, deplete energy from your immune system and more likely to get a cold. There's actually limited evidence to support that. And it's not really 100% sure. But if you're a little risk averse, you're worried about getting sick, don't overdo it. But very few people are out at that level. But here's one really important fact that has not been publicized enough. If you look at individuals who are physically active versus those who are inactive. So Kaiser Permanente Health System in California did this because they have good data on physical activity levels. They looked at Californians who got 150 minutes a week of physical activity versus those who didn't. And at their likelihood of getting sick from COVID or dying from COVID. And the data showed that after you corrected for obesity, for smoking, for diabetes, for hypertension, for all kinds of comorbidities, that individuals who exercised 150 minutes a week were 2.5 times less likely to die of COVID. 2.5 times. This is after correcting for other factors. They were also 1.7 times less likely to get sick. And this information has not been publicized as much as it should be. But it tells you that moderate levels of physical activity are immensely beneficial, even for diseases like COVID.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen that data yet, but it'll be interesting when that's published.
It's been published. It was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. It's published data. I can send you the reference.
Yeah, it'd be pretty interesting. Yeah. So I think at this time I'm going to bring it back to Lisa and Carl. So for questions from the audience. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to, before we start answering some of the questions, just wanted to go back to a couple of things. One is you talked about necessary and rewarding. And then you talked about 150 minutes a week. That's 21 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. I just really hope that people who read your book will walk away from it the way I did. And, I'm 60 and I'm just thinking, how can I stay active for the rest of my life? And I think that the message I really hope that we would get across today is that a little bit goes a long way. And so that's a general comment. And if you want to maybe expound upon that in terms of, what can you get away with that is going to help you in the long run, maybe address some of these issues of health.
Yeah. So, if you're inactive and even 5 minutes a day can have some benefit. 10 minutes a day can have some benefit. There's no one dose. It's not like a pill, right? Where there's a certain prescription that you have to have, right? We're all different. We all have different backgrounds. We have different levels of fitness. We have different injury histories. We have different proclivities. There's no one dose, right? So these numbers are kind of amalgamated from large samples, and they're just sort of pulled out of thin air to some extent. I mean, they're not made up, but we're all experiments of one. But we have this idea that you have to run marathons or swim the English Channel or whatever to be healthy, but that's just not true. And our ancestors weren't doing crazy amounts of physical activity. We're adapted to be active, and we're not adapted to be inactive. But the good news is you don't need to do a lot. Anything is better than nothing, and the evidence is clear. But I think everybody knows that. I think the harder problem is not how much to do. The harder problem is, how do you motivate yourself to do it when it's not fun, right? And just telling you, just do it, or having a doctor tell you to do it, that just, it works for some people, but it doesn't work for most of us, right? And so we need to get away from this commercialized, medicalized, commodified, industrialized a way of thinking about exercise. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but it's not working for the majority of Americans. And I think we need to come up with sort of more social solutions that are kind of compassionate and understanding. And again, I think the best way to help each other do this is to make it fun, you know, and for most people, that's to make it social. And so, you know, the more communities can get together and find ways to promote fun, social kinds of physical activity like dancing. You know, in Mexico, where I often also do work, in the town square of you know, in the town, every, you know, often many nights, there's just a band comes out and they start playing and people start dancing. That's physical activity, and it's delightful, and people don't think of it as exercise, but it's keeping them healthy and happy, and it's wonderful. Why don't more towns have like dancing every evening?
Right. You've mentioned dancing several times tonight, and it just sounds like a lot of fun to me. And I hope people will think about that a little bit. We have some questions, and I'm going to try to help you with these. One of the questions is from someone who wonders about how important is it to do various types of exercise. And I guess I would add to that, I'm thinking, you know, aerobic, strength, stretching, all the different types that we have come to know as exercise. Why don't you comment on like the perfect program?
So that's a great question. So first of all, there is no perfect program. That does not exist, right? That's the kind of medicalized prescription. That said, you know, we all evolve for endurance. You know, humans have a special, and I go into the book about this, but we're especially evolved for endurance. And so cardio is still the kind of the bedrock of most exercise programs. You know, if you really want to, for example, the reason we call it cardio is it's good for your cardiovascular system. Remember, that's the #1 cause of death in the United States. So cardio really is wonderful for your cardiovascular system. It's important for metabolic health. It's, if you want to prevent Alzheimer's, you know, nothing beats cardio. So cardio is, you know, I would say most people who are in the business would say, you know, cardio is the bedrock, but strength training is important too, especially as we get older. People get frail. They get what's called sarcopenia, which means flesh loss. You know, you start losing muscle mass, and just getting out of a chair becomes hard, and doing various kinds of tasks. And then you get this vicious circle, and it gets harder to do stuff. And then, so as we get older, strength training becomes increasingly important. Of course, it's important for our bones and stuff earlier in life. So yeah, some kind of mix is good. And also intensity is, you know, sometimes, you know, it's good to go for a nice long walk or run or jog or, you know, swim or whatever you like to do, but occasionally a little bit of intensity is good too. So, you know, I think, you know, mixing it up, but, you know, as always, the most important thing is to do something that you enjoy doing and that doesn't get yourself injured. So there's, you know, there's no one perfect prescription, but, you know, some mix of cardio and strength, and some mix of intensity and endurance, and, you know, it's not that complicated.
So the title itself says a lot about what we've discovered about whether we've evolved to want to do more exercise. And one of our people has a question: how do we overcome the instinct to not want to exercise?
Well, that's tough. I mean, you can't really get rid of the instinct. You just, I think that it's just like, you know, it's you need to appreciate it, and then we all have to come up with our own solutions, right? There's never going to be a one size fits all solution, right? For some of us, it's to make it necessary, right? You know, so I mean, you know, as I mentioned before, I mean, every time I walk into my building, I have an instinct to take the elevator. It's really true, and I have to think about it when I walk into the building. I think, I'm not going to take the elevator. I'm not going to take the elevator, and you know. And especially if there's somebody around, you know, then that's easy. Then don't take the elevator. But I also, you know, I sign up for runs, so that helps me exercise. I really, you know, during the pandemic, I started doing Peloton, the app, and that's been really helpful, because even though there's like, I'm just exercising in front of a TV, there's a guy in front of me exercising. And that, for some strange reason, helps me do it, right? It becomes social, even though it's on a TV. So, you know, some friends, you know, my wife has friends she walks with, and you know, there's all kinds of different ways we can do it. We all just have to find ways to do it. There's no one size fits all. You just we have to find ways to make it necessary for ourselves and ways to make it enjoyable. But if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it, right? I think that's the most important thing.
So kind of related to that, one of our comments that came in is, and I think this is really important because the question is it relates to that even 5 minutes more than you did yesterday or the day before is going to make a difference. I think a lot of people, if they knew that just a small amount of time could make a difference, it might help them do something. And
Yeah.
so just comment on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just so important, right? You don't need a lot of exercise to get the benefits, right? And I think that's just not appreciated well enough. There's just so many things that people don't see. Do you know that if you just exercise 20 minutes a day, if a woman exercises 20 minutes a day, just walking, she can lower her lifetime risk of breast cancer between 30 to 50%. Wow. 30 to 50%, just that's 150 minutes a week, right? Why is that fact not better known? It's because we live in a society where we focus so much on treating diseases rather than preventing them. And there's nothing wrong with treating diseases. I'm all in favor of treating diseases. So this is not a either or, right? It should be a both. And it's just, the information is just not out there enough. And I think that could be very motivating for people to know that, right? Alzheimer's is another one. Alzheimer's, one of the fastest growing diseases in the world. And, a lot of us are concerned about Alzheimer's. Nothing comes anywhere as close to preventing Alzheimer's as exercise. And again, you don't need huge amounts to lower your risk of Alzheimer's by 50% or so. And more people need to know that. Doing Sudoku and crossword puzzles and learning another language, none of that's been really shown to help, but exercise does. And we even know why. We know the mechanisms why. So I think we need to get the word out that, you don't need to, do crazy amounts of exercise to get enormous benefits.
Mhm. So here's a really important one, I think. I know it's why I exercise on a regular basis. You talked in the book about the effect of exercise on mental health.
Yeah.
Mhm. And do you see the mental health benefits of exercise as something you would like to pursue in more detail?
Well,
Especially with kids being less active.
You couldn't ask a better question, because that's exactly what we're doing now. We actually just got a big grant to work on that here in our community to try to increase exercise levels among college students. We have an epidemic of anxiety, of depression. There's a lot of mental health issues, and there's abundant data that physical activity is incredibly important for both treating and preventing a lot of these mental health issues. And we even know why, right? There's a lot of evidence about, when you exercise, you increase levels of dopamine and serotonin, and you increase levels of growth factors like brain-derived neurotropic growth factor, BDNF, and so on. There's a whole suite of beneficial things that happen in the brain that are important for mental health. And the evidence is that, for example, for treating depression, exercise is as effective, if not more effective, as any known pharmaceutical, and can work alongside a pharmaceutical. And remember, not everybody even can have access to pharmaceuticals. So we really need to increase levels of physical activity for everybody, but especially among people who are very vulnerable to mental health problems, and our kids are especially vulnerable. And so that's a major focus right now of our research, right? Which is how can we leverage this important tool? We are really failing our kids in terms of physical activity and physical education. I don't know what it's like in Michigan, but here in Massachusetts, there's just not enough physical education. Think about colleges. A few decades ago, every college in the United States required some kind of physical education. Harvard is no exception. And in 1970, the physical activity requirement was dropped at Harvard. And now people think it's strange and coercive to require people to exercise, students to exercise, but that was the way every school was, and for hundreds of years. So I think we need to kind of go back to the drawing board and think about ways to do it, but ways to do it that are acceptable and fitness shaming and no body shaming. I mean, the world has gotten better in some regards, and I think we've gotten better at thinking about this. And there are ways to do it that are inclusive and accommodating for people with disabilities and so on. But to help people help themselves, and I think it's our sacred obligation. I don't think we can run away from it at all.
So that kind of relates to a question one of our viewers had about what the schools might do to change the mindset of kids, but I think that's too broad of a question. My question is, have you or do you anticipate at some point in your life being a part of, perhaps a government movement or some sort of special committee to address this issue? Have you ever been a part of that, or do you anticipate that in the future because of the work you're doing?
Well, we've got a big program. We're working on a research program and here at Harvard, and who knows, maybe that will turn into something larger. I mean, it's certainly a priority of mine and a passion of mine, and so I'm certainly interested in trying to to work on this. I mean, I'm an evolutionary biologist and an anthropologist. I'm not a psychiatrist or an education specialist. So it's not my expertise, but it's something I care about and would be happy to work on.
Okay. Well, we're approaching the magic hour for timeframes of these programs, and I'm not sure if our readers have read the book, but I encourage people to take a look at it and keep thinking about some of the great messages that are in the book and pass those on to other people. And then before we finish, I just wanted to end up with Mike with any final questions that Mike might have, perhaps about your experience as a Harvard professor.
Yes, yes. So Dan, so yeah, I mean, we're all fascinated with the fact that you went to school there and then you're teaching there now. So what is it like to teach and be a research individual at Harvard itself? I mean, what's that like?
Well, I mean, it's a wonderful place to be a professor, and I'm very lucky. I mean, we have wonderful students and wonderful colleagues and wonderful resources. It's a great place. Lots of great students from Michigan, by the way. I've had in my lab even some great students from Michigan, a lot of runners from Michigan too. But the world is, Harvard is an exceptional place, but I think one of the things that's changed about the world is that, it used to be that there were, a few really top universities but now, the wealth is much more broadly spread, and there are a lot of great universities. University of Michigan, one of the best places in the world too. I mean, it's a great place to be, but I'm also aware that there are lots of other great places to be. But I certainly enjoy being a professor here. It's a real privilege.
Well, thank you. And Lisa, thank you for allowing me to be a guest moderator here too. It's been fascinating. And again, I can't say enough about the book. I've not only read it once and twice, but even 3 times now. So yeah,
Gosh.
Getting ready for this. But yeah, it's a great book. I really enjoyed it a lot. So thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to be here.
And I hope that everybody will be as motivated as I was to keep working on being active. That is the main goal that we had to have you on here. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Mike. And thank you everyone else who signed on today. And let's all keep reading.
All right. Happy exercising.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan, Lisa, and Mike, for a fascinating conversation. And thanks to you all for joining us this evening. We hope you'll continue the conversation by purchasing a copy of Exercise from your favorite independent bookstore. And thank you again to our event sponsor, the Traverse City Track Club, and to our donors and major supporters, Cordia, Today's Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, and the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, also Interlochen Public Radio, the Traverse City Record Eagle, and so many others who make what we do here at the National Writers Series possible. This event is also made possible in part by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the Michigan Humanities Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And thanks to all of you, our viewers. Your support makes all the difference. And the proceeds of our events go to our Raising Writers programs to help share the love of reading and writing. Thank you and good night.